Hello, everyone. Let's discuss group interviews and see how these group interviews are different from focus groups. When we use the term group interviews or when we're using the term focus groups, remember they both come under the heading of qualitative interviews. They both refer to as qualitative interviews, and it wouldn't be wrong to refer to them as primary sources of qualitative interviews. Now, interviews. Now, before discussing group interviews and focus groups, let me remind you there are two more type of qualitative interviews that are very popular. To name them, we have semi-structured interviews and we have unstructured interviews as well that we've already covered in the previous lesson. So to begin with, when we use the word group interviews, a group interview involves interviewing multiple participants. Now, catch the important key terms over here. We're talking about group interviews, and group interviews involve interviewing multiple participants at the same time, covering a range of themes and topics. However, when we use the term focus groups, a focus group refers to a type of group interview where participants share characteristics and discuss specific topics guided by a moderator. So it wouldn't be wrong if I may say group interviews are an example of they're better described as an interview which have a more relatively formal structure, whereas a focus group is more like a discussion. Now, a couple of points that I'd like discussing about group interviews and focus groups first, and then we move on towards their strengths and limitations. As we speak about group interviews and we compare them with focus groups, like I said, group interviews involve multiple participants interviewed together. Often, this is led by a researcher. Let me correct this: researcher. However, when we use the word focus groups are group discussions between individuals who share similar characteristics. They could be sharing similar characteristics, they could be sharing similar experiences over a specific topic. So when we talk about the basic difference between group interviews and focus groups, like I said, group interviews are an interview is an example of interview that involves multiple participants being interviewed together, whereas focus group has more to do with a guided discussion. Now, taking this further, if we talk about the difference in terms of the purpose, usually you conduct group interviews to collect individual responses. You're trying to collect individual responses within a group, or the extent to which individuals, when they're a part of a group, how is it that their responses get affected? Or an individual just consider an example over here. If I talk about an individual being interviewed alone versus an individual being interviewed when he or she is a member of a particular group, how is it that the responses would differ? On the other hand, when I talk about focus groups try to explore dynamics. Now, focus groups try to explore group dynamics, which are or the shared experiences or the collective views over something. So, group interviews versus focus groups over here. Focus. Now, if I take this a little further and we talk about the focus. Now, group interviews tend to focus on individual opinions and response within the group. However, focus groups, they tend to focus on group interaction. So over here, we are talking about another difference. These focus on individual opinions and these focus on group interaction. Taking it ahead, if we talk about the difference in terms of the structure, group interviews are seen to be more structured. They usually involve direct questions being asked. However, when we talk about focus groups comparatively are seen to be less structured, with participants sharing their own or shaping their own discussion. So it wouldn't be wrong if we say participants have more of control when they're a part of a focus group as compared to them being interviewed together collectively in a group interview. Now let's move on and quickly discuss a couple of strengths and weaknesses of the usage of group interview and see how they're different from focus groups. But before I could proceed with that, I'd want to show you the questions that we've had in the past in our CAIs. We had this question in May, June 2024, variant 1.1 and May, June 2024, variant 1.3. The question that we had in May, June 2024, variant 1.1 said, explain two strengths of group interviews as a research method. And the question that we had in May June 2024, variant 1.3, this says explain two limitations of group interviews as a research method. Now, remember, if you could get a question on a group interview, you could also get a question on focus interviews, or I'm sorry, on focus groups. So bear this thing in mind. Do not do this, because remember, if you're getting this as a if you're getting this question in question two, I mean, if you're getting this question in section A in your paper one, you do not get any choice there, right? There's choice there, but the choice is only available in section B, not in section A. The 34 mark section A that you have, that you come across in your CAIs, both for paper one and paper two, does not allow you any choice at all. So taking this a little further, if we talk about the strengths of group interview, we can say that the researcher can access wide ranging views and experiences and obtain a rich source of information on relevant topics. Of course, when you're talking about a group interview, because there are many people involved, the likelihood that the researcher or the interviewer might come across or might have access to wide ranging views. You might have access to wide ranging views because there are more people that are available there. So this could again be very helpful for the researcher, because this could be a very rich source of data. Number two, if we move on towards the second strength over here, by interviewing several people together, the researcher can save time and money. So this is more cost effective and helps save time as well. The third strength, individuals may feel more comfortable describing their experiences in a group setting because they are supported by others. So the participant or the interviewee might feel more confident and comfortable in a group setting. So another advantage that we could bring into use over here, because in a group interview, there are many participants being interviewed at the same time, the researcher, if required, could recruit interviewees for a follow-up interview as well. Recruitment of participants for a follow-up interview is easier. It's easier because there are many participants that are present there. So another advantage that we could put to use over here, when you talk about group interviews, they may generate new ideas for researcher to explore. You may be able to generate new ideas to explore. Now, these were a few advantages of the usage of group interview amongst others when it comes to conducting a sociological research, or when it comes to using a sociological research, when it comes to using group interviews as a part of a sociological research. All of these that I have marked over here, they're all advantages, or they're all strengths of the usage of group interview. Now, if we move on and we discuss a couple of limitations, limitation number one, we could say that the researcher must manage the group interview carefully, particularly when there are topics that are of a potentially sensitive nature. So, sensitive topics require skillful handling. Number one. Number two, in a group setting, the participants may influence each other. Some may dominate and others may be less open than in an individual interview. So some individuals might dominate the discussion, which again would leave very little opportunity for others, let's just say the shy sorts, to be able to share their view. Another disadvantage, because there are many participants that are involved, there's a possibility that the participants might there's a possibility that the participants might talk over each other, or in other words, I mean, let's just say if a bunch of people start to get talking together at the same time, transcription of that content might be difficult. So we could write down transcription of information or the data received might be difficult, because there are a lot of people, and you never know if managing those people might be a skill too. Another disadvantage, privacy of participants, or you could also say confidentiality of participants is at risk. Now, why do I say that confidentiality of participants is at risk? Now, let's just say if there's a sensitive topic that is being discussed, some of the participants might not want to publicly associate themselves with that particular type of discussion. Remember, had there been a single individual, it would have been easier for the researcher to be able to handle. It would have been easier for the researcher to not only be able to handle, but it would have been easier for the researcher to be able to keep it a secret. I mean, the more people there are involved, the more difficult or the tougher it is to keep secrets. I hope everyone would agree to this one. So these points that you all saw, let me just zoom in. These are a few advantages of the usage of group interview in a sociological research. However, if we move on and discuss the limitations, I'm sorry, these are a couple of advantages as well as disadvantages of the usage of group interviews in a sociological research. However, if we talk about focus groups have their own advantages and their own limitations too. Now, for instance, if we talk about focus groups here, the first advantage that we could possibly put to use is often focus group members have certain things in common. For example, there could be similarity in terms of the age, the gender, the experience, or expertise. These similarities can encourage discussion and interest and minimize the intervention of the moderator. So we could say similarities amongst participants encourage discussions, and this minimizing intervention from the moderator, because that's exactly what you want when you're conducting a focus group. Likewise, another advantage, a focus group involves interaction between participants compared to a one-to-one interview. This can produce different kinds of data. Participants in a focus group discuss and debate, agree and disagree. This encourages them to really think about their views. Focus groups can also show how people may make sense of things collectively and develop a shared viewpoint. So, this is an insight. Focus groups provide an insight. This provides an insight into how people make sense of things collectively. and consequently develop a shared viewpoint. So when you're discussing any particular issue, you could agree, you could disagree, you could debate, you could, I mean, all of this would eventually lead to you understanding what you as a researcher understanding what the effect of others being around you can have. Remember, focus groups typically involve individuals sharing some or the other similarity. Either could be an experience, it could be a characteristic. Let's just say similarity in terms of age. Let's just say similarity in terms of everyone appearing for the AS sociology paper. So this was an advantage. So is this one. Moving on quickly towards the disadvantages of using focus groups. So there is, of course, less control of interviewer, because remember, this is typically a discussion that goes on. So that could be seen as a potential disadvantage over here. Another disadvantage over here could be, despite trying to minimize the intervention, the moderator sometimes has to get involved to ensure that things run smoothly. For example, to prevent one member of the group dominating the discussion. So, intervention by the interviewer might affect the flow of discussion amongst members. So, groupthink or pressure from other participants. Pressure from other participants could affect your responses too. Let's just say there are some participants that are more vocal than the others. Participants can affect responses. By the end of the day, you might not be able to figure out if whatever the particular participant is saying is his or her own view, or does it have to do with what others around them might feel about that particular issue. Another problem over here could be social desirability. Social desirability, when people start giving answers according to what leaves a very good image of them. Now, these were a few strengths and limitations of the usage of focus groups in sociological research. This one, you might as well pause this over here and copy this down if required. These are the strengths and limitations of the usage of focus group in a sociological research. And these are the strengths and limitations of the usage of a group interview in a sociological research. Now, both focus groups and group interviews, I mean, you could use sociological examples over here as well. I just take this opportunity and quickly guide you with some sociological examples too, just in case they might act handy when you sit for your CA examinations. So we're talking about group interviews here. You could give the reference of Paul Willis, his research that was conducted in 1977. He wrote a book. The name of the book was Learning to Labor. And he used group interviews to explore the lads' shared attitude towards authority and education, revealing the role of peer influence. So the research from his book, Learning to Labor, I mean, you could use the name of this researcher, Paul Willis. He had used a group interview. Number two, you could refer to Sue Sharp, and Sharp conducted her research back in 1994. And then before that, she had conducted a research in 1976, if I'm not mistaken, where she was trying to figure out the extent to which females had changed their priorities. I mean, when she conducted her research in 1970s, she claimed that girls would prioritize their family, their friendship, their relationships at home, the love relationships, marriage over education and careers. And when she conducted a research again in the year 1994, she figured out that these priorities had now changed and girls were now more inclined towards education because they were more future oriented. So Sue Sharp in 1994 examined young girls changing ambitions using group interviews to identify evolving collective attitudes. So her research on young girls changing ambitions, young girls changing ambitions here. A third research that we could use, a reference could be of this study that was conducted by Howard Becker in 1971. Now, all three of these researches that you are that I'm using over here, you would study them when you're preparing for A2s for paper 3 education. Now, Howard Becker conducted a research investigating the labeling process, investigating the labeling process, labeling process involved by teachers, the way teachers label some students as, let's just say, bright ones and others as not so bright ones. So these three researches could be used as examples of group interviews. And if we take this a little further, and if I may give you an example of, what do you call it, focus groups. Let's just note down a couple of examples of focus groups here. So we're talking about focus groups here. A few sociological examples. You could use example of David Morgan, who conducted his research in 1997. And then you could use the example of Skeggs. This was again in 1997. And you could also use the example of Edward and Holland. And they conducted the research in 2013. Now, these three are examples of focus group where we talk about David Morgan's research. Morgan pioneered the use of focus groups to capture shared norms and collective views, showing the value for exploring group dynamics. So you could say Morgan supported the idea of using focus groups, and he believed that focus groups were an amazing way through which the researcher could capture shared norms and collective views. Shared norms and collective views. Why though? Because they were a part of a discussion together. Number two, if you talk about the study that was conducted by Skeggs studied working class women's identities, and Skeggs also used focus groups to uncover shared experiences of class and gender. Number three, the study that was conducted by Edward and Holland. Edward and Holland also used collective groups to explore sensitive issues like homelessness, empowering participants through shared discussion. So, according to David Morgan, focus groups help capture shared norms. Number two, according to Skeggs conducted a research on working class women's identities. As to how using focus group could be used to uncover their shared experiences of social class and gender. And Edward and Holland felt that focus groups could be an amazing way through which researchers could explore sensitive issues. Example, homelessness. So these could be a few sociological references amongst many others that could possibly be used while writing answers for group interviews and focus groups. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.